Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome. A mindful reminder that our podcast is not to be considered medical advice. Our intention for today's podcast is to share about the possibility and potential in approaching business, personal growth, and entrepreneurship as a personal growth endeavor mindfully.
We hope to share with you what you can discover and what can happen when you apply pause and presence to business and personal growth. And that when you come to it from a place of mindful intention, things are much more easeful. No urgency is needed.
Some of the takeaways that we hope that you'll get is that this personal growth is a journey, and in and of itself, it can be fun. So don't forget to enjoy the journey along the way. Also, to remind you that we are stronger together. There is power and impact when you collaborate. And in doing so, the effects of the collaboration are much farther reaching, oftentimes more than you think.
So we wanted to start, as usual, with stories and share why we think we might be qualified to talk about this topic and what our own journeys with entrepreneurship and personal growth and personal expansion are. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So my journey begins a few years ago when I was recruited to a community private practice setting, knowing that from my work in academic medicine, having been the executive director for the Center for Mindfulness at UC San Diego, I knew I wanted to continue to teach mindfulness in my day-to-day. So in knowing that, I wanted to expand upon also my offerings as a mindfulness teacher, especially beyond that of implementing it within the practice of medicine. And because I knew that it was something that was separate from the practice of medicine that I wanted to do, knowing that it was a skill that I had and wanted to continue to cultivate, Awakened Breath LLC was born. So really my motivation in founding Awakened Breath LLC was to broaden my reach. And that's really what brought me to my entrepreneurial journey. It really was an area of discomfort for me, especially with marketing and even at that time charging for services. In part because I was so used to not really formally getting paid to teach mindfulness. I also was not used to having to put myself out there and promote myself and market. But over the years and as an ongoing work in progress, I know and have come to believe that my abilities, my years of additional training in mindfulness are really priceless, and that I should be compensated for the unique skills and perspectives that I bring. And in fact, if I wasn't getting paid, it might have led to even more risk related to burnout, overwork, exhaustion, perfectionism. That being said, though, it's the in-depth paid offerings that helps me to balance out my ongoing mission and contributions to free offerings that I teach as well. So my lessons, in summary, I've boiled it down to 3. There are so many lessons, but here are my 3. So number 1 is that realizing in this entrepreneurial journey that's separate from my practice of medicine, I wanted to continue to do what I love doing and to do more of it, and also to get paid doing it. So teaching mindfulness was definitely more than just a hobby for me. It was a way of living, and that whenever I taught someone through the in-depth classes that I offer, I also, as the teacher, get so much back and learn so much. So I want to put this out there that it's okay to do more of what you love doing and to get paid doing it. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is you can pay and ask lots of people to tell you what to do when it comes to personal growth and entrepreneurship. But if it doesn't feel right, like if you don't feel aligned in what that paid person or group of people are telling you to do, then my piece of advice for you is to turn inwards and ask yourself why. There's definitely a reason for why there's a discomfort that's arising. Perhaps there's a malalignment, a misalignment with your values. And this type of curious introspection of asking why can definitely help serve as your own authentic internal compass navigating the non-linear path of entrepreneurship. And then my last lesson is to delegate. So lesson number 3, delegate, delegate, delegate. For the sake of your well-being, especially if there are tasks in your business journey that you don't like to do, then perhaps you invest in your own business and delegate that part out. Because if you don't delegate, then you'd actually be taking yourself away from doing more of what it is that you love. So think of it as protecting your asset of time so that you can stay more in your zone of genius, not spending time configuring and scheduling, in my case, for instance, social media posts. What about you, Jessie?
I love what you said, actually, and it ties right into my story. This idea of it's possible to do something you love and have that be what you do. And that for me, it wasn't so much a conflict of like one versus the other or what was worthy or what was not, but to allow the fact that you can, if something is really calling you or drawing you to it, that you can do that and that can be what you do. And so not so much from a place of a goal or something to accomplish or something to achieve, but as a calling or a, I know we talk about the zone of genius, but like something that you can't not do. It's sort of the thing you were meant to do. And so just when you brought that up, that came to mind. And this idea also of following your heart and trusting your intuition. So trusting that like if your heart is telling you to do something, that it is actually smart and it has your best interest in mind. And I think often we don't follow our heart because we listen to our head and we think that there's some perfect better way to do things. And we therefore watch what everyone else is doing instead of listening to what we feel like we should be doing. And the other thing that popped up just as you were giving your lessons is that there isn't a best way to do it. We all have our own journey, and your journey is actually quite different than my journey. And there are a lot of similarities. And then I look at a lot of other people's journeys and they're totally different than our journeys. And so knowing that we're all like on our own path to our own place at different times, and everyone's journey is beautiful in its own right. So for me, I started Pause and Presence LLC, as we're talking about the LLCs of the world. And for me, Pause and Presence came about during a sabbatical in which I was pausing and being present, which is in part where the name came from, though it also describes exactly what I do, I think. And I, in that sabbatical, was taking a break from my practice of medicine after 20 years, trying to figure out, I just didn't feel in alignment. Not that what I was doing wasn't worthwhile or wasn't of value, but that I felt very strongly that I had more to give, and my purpose in this world was bigger and broader than what I was doing. But the conflict that I had was being able to honor that, even when you're already bringing value where you are, and you might be really good at it and you might like it, and you might want to follow your heart and do something else, so that there doesn't have to be this conflict. It can be of value just to do what you love. And I really came to what I was doing from a place of wanting to share things that had helped me solve a problem that I faced, and wanting to share that from a place of really service, knowing that when I found myself stuck, I couldn't find the solutions that I needed for people like me. And so that when I found things that worked, I felt very much called to have to share them. So that was my journey. And I really started from nothing and turned it into, actually, so not a side gig, but a full-time job, really very quickly. And what I attribute the success to was feeling grounded and committed to exactly what I was doing, and knowing that I was solving the problem that I needed help solving and bringing value to other people and offering something that people very much needed. So I wasn't sort of looking at selling something. It was very much a calling or a commitment, which I think many of us see as medicine. But for me, my commitment and calling went beyond medicine. It went beyond my role as a physician, and it went into helping, caring for physicians. And so coming from that place of groundedness was really of value for me, and I think helped me ground in my journey as to the why of what I was doing. And you mentioned the why, like when it's really your passion and really your love, then the why is not about having another business that gets you to some other maybe financial goal. It's really the power of sharing something that's really vital for other people. So in my case, it was the synergy of coaching and mindfulness, and helping me be able to simplify and find peace in my own life and my own relationships, and being able to bring these together in the exact way that I wish they had been available to me, and to be able to share that so that other people can benefit from this journey. And so the lessons that I wanted to share were a willingness to actually be willing to step into your own lane and trust yourself and bring what makes you come alive, and your own wisdom and your own experience to the table. And so shortly before I began this journey was when I realized what wisdom and experience I had. I hadn't really reflected and seen that. I had been someone who worked for a large organization as actually a leader in many capacities, but also just seeing my role as being part of the organization and not really owning the 20 years of experience in physician wellness and the 20 years of experience in relationships and families as a pediatrician. And so seeing that I had all of these skills and wisdom, and that they were within me, no matter where I went and no matter what I was doing, and being willing to honor that and own it and trust in myself, is really the first key thing that allowed me to, I think, really set myself on a successful course. And then coming from the why, which I mentioned, doing something. So there's a quote, which is, what the world needs is, doing what the world needs is not what we need. It's doing, the world needs us to do what makes us come alive. And when you find something that makes you come alive, if everyone brings that and brings their passion, the world is really a much more beautiful place. And seeing also that the journey can be fun. And we've mentioned that a couple times. It doesn't have to be a hard, difficult journey. It's not that it's easy, but if you realize that part of the discomfort leads to fun, and that the journey can be fun, that really leads you to come from a place of inspiration, as opposed to a place of pushing or forcing or trying to get to a certain goal. And then the other thing that really helped me along the way and feels very mindful and intentional was this idea of having my own back. And so once I made the decision to go off on my own and do this thing that I felt like I couldn't not do, I wasn't going to do my usual, which is, should I have stayed in my old job? Should I have made a different decision? Even every step along the way, should I have done it this way or should I have done it that way? I made a very conscious, intentional decision that whatever decision I made, I was going to decide it was the right one and believe in myself. This was totally unnatural for me. And so I really did have to be intentional and mindful. And the mindful piece of noticing every time I went back to my old habit of saying like, oh, I should have done that. And it was for me an incredible habit. And then saying, oh, but intentionally, I'm going to choose to not judge myself and decide that I've done the right thing and see what happens. And then the fourth lesson I just wanted to share is this idea of non-urgency. And that the more, anytime that I began to feel urgent, thinking I should be somewhere faster, I would actually go slower. And so pausing and being present with where you are and being, I won't say comfortable because I don't think it is a comfortable journey, but uncomfortably uncomfortable. And just realizing that that in and of itself is part of the journey. That then all of a sudden you move forward much more quickly. And I think that when I look back at sort of the way that the year turned out, which was much better than I ever thought it could, it's because I was willing to sit and pause and be present in that discomfort and be mindful that it was uncomfortable and not rush to fix or solve it, but just be there and experience it and tap back into the why and who I was and where I was, and that this was something I just felt that I uniquely was here in this world to share. And then all of a sudden, that's where things just start to evolve from there. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how we evolved from this beginning space of entrepreneurship also. And I think that my next evolution is this idea of expansion through inner knowing. And many circles of entrepreneurship talk about this idea of massive action and pushing and doing more and pushing yourself through the uncomfortable. And what I have found to be a really helpful tool is tapping into this inner knowing and tapping into your heart space. And as many of you who know me know, I like to do the hand to heart. And just as you feel like you're pushing yourself forward or, oh, I need to take massive action, my thought is usually that I actually need to take less action and be willing to sit in the discomfort. And so tapping into that inner knowing and really deciding how you want to show up. And so being willing to see what's in there and what's of value to share. And I love this idea of showing up in there. I call it beautifulness, but like allowing yourself to shine uniquely, not trying to be the same as everyone else, but just allowing yourself to show up in exactly what makes your beauty special and full and what you have to offer, and enjoying the journey. And when you show up that way, your energy is so different and what you have to offer is so different. And so it's not really about business development. It's about experiencing and being in the moment and enjoying it. And then listening to your heart, which I've mentioned a few times, listening to your intuition and knowing whether you're on track or off track, and being willing to trust that as opposed to what all the people on the outside are telling you to do, really grounding into who you are. And this idea that what you get by achieving your goals is actually not as important as who you become in the process. And the process of entrepreneurship, I think, is the whole point, actually. I'm a totally different person now than I was 18 months ago when I started this journey. And so not only is there a thriving business, but I'm a completely different person with a different level of trust and a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching the world and being in the world. And I'm a much more authentic person because I have allowed myself to listen to myself and trust myself and show up as me in that beautifulness, which is not necessarily beautiful, but my version of that. And realizing that when we each show up that way, the world is much more beautiful. So I like to think of a labyrinth in particular, and labyrinths are all about the process and not rushing to the center and not rushing to the goal. And that's what I think of when I think of this entrepreneurship journey, going slowly and realizing that it's the learning and the experience in getting there that's really the point. And when you focus on that, that's where I think the success comes, because you're so in the moment and in the experience and focused on what you're sharing and what you're bringing and what you love. And that brings more of that to everyone else and what you're bringing and creating in the world. And then the other thought about labyrinths, they're like life and they're like business. And I learned this on a retreat that I was on a couple of years ago, which was not about business at all, but that labyrinths are repeating patterns with intermittent breakthroughs. And I do find that in business, it's kind of like that, right? You just keep at it and you keep trying and you try this. And all of a sudden you have this sort of great forward movement, and then you stop and then you have this great forward movement. So being present for the rapid expansion and the uncomfortable stillness is part of that journey. So values are the other thing that we've tapped into a little bit, and coming at both entrepreneurship and personal expansion as a value-based, I don't know, proposition is the word that comes to mind. But knowing that when we come from our values, we're showing up real and present, and that makes the journey much more beautiful. And those who you are offering your skills and wisdom and service to, much better able to trust you. So I would love to hear from you, Nicheng, about your values and how they've played a role in your business.
Along the lines of values that I'm now currently working on and embodying is one of the foundational attitudes of mindfulness, and that is non-striving. So we have an action bias as human beings to constantly do, and do more. And recognizing through my own internal work of learning and teaching mindfulness and through my practice, I have a tendency for overwork and perfectionism. And that tendency for overwork and perfectionism is oftentimes at the risk of my own health. And now, being a 10-year cancer survivor, I have to be very intentional in my actions. And so for me, being thoughtful about taking slower, intentional steps helps me embody this particular attitudinal foundation of non-striving in mindfulness. And definitely it's great to have goals. And to a certain extent, we do need goals in entrepreneurship, but at the same time, choosing to embody mindfulness within an entrepreneurial journey, you can choose to drop the judgment. You can choose to drop this action bias, and you can choose to be more self-compassionate. So you don't have to necessarily put so much pressure on yourself to achieve a certain income or meet a certain timeline deadline that oftentimes is arbitrary. So for me, when I put a lot of pressure on myself and have high expectations for myself, knowing about my tendencies for perfectionism and overwork, it then becomes kind of a slippery slope. But through mindfulness practice, I can recognize when I'm headed down that path and when I intrinsically start becoming out of alignment. So I can easily, literally slip into my prior default mode of constantly striving, but through mindfulness practice, recognize when I'm starting to head that way.
Makes me think of one of the other mindful attitudes of trust. And so it's non-striving, but in order to non-strive, you have to trust yourself and know that you're not lazy. That's not what non-striving is. It's really trusting yourself that you'll do what's right for you, and you'll be along this journey in a way that's authentic and in integrity with yourself. And thinking that that's really how we have to approach life and relationships and every day and the practice of medicine as well. And where we perhaps get really off track is when we lose sight of that and we can't trust ourselves, and we're looking at external validation and things that make you think that you're doing it right that aren't necessarily coming from within.
Absolutely. I think that the entrepreneurial journey can be a really seamless metaphor for life in general.
And I did want to bring up, this podcast is about entrepreneurship, but when we were sort of thinking about it and talking about it, it's also about personal expansion and personal growth. And maybe you don't have a business, but maybe you want to grow a certain part of you, or maybe you want to grow a garden, or maybe you want to learn a new skill or move to a different place. And I actually think that all of these principles and key learnings apply to all of that, because what really entrepreneurship is growing a part of you, for many of us, at least in medicine, that wasn't there before. And it's really having a deep trust and inner knowing and a mission of why. And so wherever you find yourself and whatever you're doing, I think these same tools and principles can help you expand into some zone of discomfort or learning a new thing. So when I think about my values, interestingly for me, it's really about showing up real and being vulnerable and honest and showing up as me. And so not as what I think people might want to see as me, but actually as me. And part of my purpose in the world, I think, is to share that story and share that journey, in part to show other people what's possible. And through doing what I do, it creates possibility in other people's minds, but also just share with people that they're not alone, and that we are all humans and we all have struggles, and we can all also drop the struggle about the struggles. And so being this real, vulnerable human who shares only my lived experience, because I can't share someone else's experience, but knowing that that can be helpful to others in however they choose to use it or interpret it. And then I also see my value as to be very much nurturing and giving. And I come from this space, I often use the term, what would love do? And it's really about what would love do for everyone who's listening, everyone who is doing on their own journey, sharing that, because a world with more love and more nurturing is better. So it's not about competition. It's about nurturing myself and nurturing those that I work with, and really creating, I'm going to go back to this idea of beauty, which is kind of funny, but creating more beauty in the world. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily think of business as beauty, but to me, it's bringing more beauty into the world. And then another key value for me is groundedness. And groundedness is connecting with that inner knowing and not spinning in the journey or a rush to get somewhere, but really planting down my roots and growing my roots deeply, knowing that those roots are my purpose and what I'm called to do and called to share in the world. And that coming from that place, you have so much more to give. If you think about a tree with strong roots, its leaves are much more plentiful and its trunk is much stronger. And so building your business or whatever your personal growth or new skill is, to have these strong roots and reconnect with them anytime that a storm pops up, or anytime that you are really, spreading your branches or your wings and tapping back into that. And then the last value that I'm focusing on, and I will say for me, this is actually a growth area, is this idea of having fun with it and remembering that life can be fun and is probably supposed to have this lighthearted joy piece of it. And my journey in medicine was much more about the struggle and giving back and serving. And interestingly, because I was in pediatrics, there was a lot of fun, and that's why I picked it. I think I really do love the joy of childhood, but realizing that whatever we do, infusing a little bit of that is good for everyone. And so we don't always have to take it totally seriously and be struggling, that we can actually enjoy the process and enjoy the journey and enjoy the growth and enjoy springtime if we're thinking about rooting in leaves.
Thanks to the Mindful Healthcare Collective executive board member, Dr. Ivana Tor, during one of her Dared to Lead workshops, I figured out what my values were, and your being real, vulnerable, and honest resonates with me in my core value of authenticity. So showing up unapologetically just as I am, however imperfectly perfect.
And beautiful you are.
And then the other value that I learned was at my core was this idea of compassion. So compassion, not just for others, which I am a super duper expert at, but something that I will constantly continue to work on is compassion for self. So I use these values as my barometer, my check-in for whenever an opportunity arises that might take time, that might take me away from potentially doing more of what it is that I love doing, to see if the motivations align with my values before I say yes. Also, at the core of mindfulness, within the definition of mindfulness, is non-judgment. So I want to ask you to take it one step further and to say to yourself, remind yourself, believe this statement that whatever you are doing or aren't doing, you are more than enough. There is a compare and despair mindset that can set in, especially on social media. And some helpful tips on noticing when you find yourself in that compare and despair mindset that have helped me particularly is being curious with myself about whatever is arising, especially when I first noticed the comparing. Where is that comparing and feeling lesser than coming from? And asking myself these questions. Can I also be happy for that person's fortuitous opportunities? We can also remind ourselves that personal growth, inclusive of entrepreneurship, is not a competition. It's not a competition with others. It doesn't have to be a competition with yourself, certainly. And so, can you remind yourself that there are enough accolades, opportunities, and growth and money even out there for everyone? So using an abundance growth mindset in approaching an entrepreneurial journey can be tremendously helpful, especially when we find ourselves in a compare and despair type situation.
The other thing for the compare and despair, or like anti-comparitis, I like to call it, is focusing on your own journey and realizing that your journey is your journey. And as I look at you, your journey is different than my journey, right? We're on completely different journeys with completely different dreams. We're on them at the same time, of course, but that if you're really focusing on what you want to bring into the world, then it doesn't matter what someone else is bringing into the world, right? We can all just bring more beauty into the world. And so focusing on you, and then being kind to yourself. So not judging yourself about how fast or slow, or the process that you took, or the detours or course correcting you might be doing along the way. I'm reminded of the comment that you've brought up a number of times before, which is how interesting. And so what if you ask that not about someone else's behavior, but about your own? You know, how interesting that I took this course instead of this route instead of that route. And realizing that there is no room for judgment there, and no room for comparing your journey to someone else's, but just how interesting that their journey went there and your journey went here. And then you can decide if you want to course correct. but that course correcting or learning or seeing possibility from someone else might be more effective than beating yourself up for not being where you think you should be, or not being strong enough, or not following a specific course. So we wanted to end this conversation talking about the joy and fun and magic, as I like to say, of collaboration, and why collaboration for us has been a huge plus and better together than alone. And I thought the first part of this story would be beautiful if Ni-Cheng shared her or how this podcast came to be and how we ended up here doing it together and what we learned from it.
So prior to this podcast being one where there were two co-hosts, I actually did debate whether or not to launch this podcast alone versus having a co-host. So my initial concern was that having a co-host was somehow potentially weak and not stepping into my own. But already 20 episodes in, the actual experience of the collaboration between me and Jessie has been really, really exemplary in helping me to step into my own, and also to show that we are very much stronger together in our mission, in our messages, as two unique people in the mindfulness world, but also bringing in our own unique takes on things and our own stories.
It does seem that the experience is so much richer when we, I'm always surprised that you say something different and it sparks something in my mind. And so just realizing that it's much more colorful with two voices. And the other thing I just came to mind as you brought this up is with two people also, some people might think it's easier. I actually would say there's a lot of things that are harder about doing it and together, and knowing that you also have to accommodate and that you're creating something together. And I think my mind sometimes often goes to, oh, well, if I could just do this on my own, or, and so but what comes out of it is so much more beautiful and so much more rich and so much more full. And that experience of working with someone is really a growth experience, I think, for both of us and for our listeners.
So thanks for being my co-host, Jessie.
Thank you too. It's a pleasure.
Another example of stronger together is the Mindful Healthcare Collective. So when I founded the group, I knew going in that I wouldn't be able to put on all of the wellness sessions that I had envisioned for healthcare professionals and the general public just by myself. But it's through a shared mission, a shared vision, a shared alignment in wanting to decrease suffering of the healthcare professionals and the general public that the 9 of us as executive board members have worked together. And just most recently, most of us got together in Santa Barbara and connected in real person. And these friendships have been forged because of our work together through the collective. And so I think that bringing together people of backgrounds that are different than one's own can offer up a multitude of different perspectives and further expand the reach of work that you are doing. So in terms of the Mindful Healthcare Collective, we talk about the ripple effects of mindfulness. I think that with the 9 of us working together collectively in the collective, we've been really able to expand our reach beyond that of each individual person alone.
And I think this idea too, it's not because you could have done it alone, or, we each could have done a podcast alone. And it's not because we couldn't do it by ourselves, but because we wanted to do it together. And we wanted to come together as a group of 9, and we want to learn from each other and grow together and share something that's bigger than each of us together. And so realizing that the together can bring so much more to the world than we can alone. And so it's not a lesser than, it's a more than. So we will end today's episode with a couple of reflection questions. And whether you apply them to entrepreneurship, business, or your own practice of medicine, something you might want to learn within it, or even your own personal growth, a skill you want to do, or even growing a garden. So what will the world miss out on if you don't do what you were meant to do? And what could today be the first day of for you?
What are your values? What would happen if you asked for help? And can you give yourself permission to slow down? What would happen if you did that?
And sometimes when we slow down, we actually move much farther forward, much faster from that place of grounded, calm, peace, and inner knowing. Thank you all so much for joining us and listening today. We would be grateful if you would leave us some reviews and stars. And please share this podcast with others who you think might enjoy or benefit. Stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for our weekly offering of a short mindful moment and mindful practice just for you. As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
Thank you for joining us for our mindful moment. If you are in a safe spot, find a comfortable seat and ground your sit bones into whatever you find yourself seated upon. If you're standing, ground your feet into the earth and find a spot where you can pause and be present. And if you're driving or not in a safe spot, please up top. Once you have arrived in that space, take a moment to ground into the earth beneath you, whether it be through your feet and the soles of your feet and your toes connecting downward into the earth, or your sit bones grounding deeply into whatever you're sitting upon. And tilt your pelvis forward and grow your spine long and tall towards the sky. Reach the crown of the head upward. And with intention, drop your shoulders and rest your hands lightly on your thighs. Coming into a position of comfort, but also strength and groundedness, centeredness. And take a deep inhale in through your nose and an exhale through your mouth. And a long, deep, sweet inhale through your nose. And exhale through your nose this time. And once again, an inhale through your nose, long, deep, sweet. And an exhale through your mouth this time. And take a moment to notice how you feel. Notice if things feel in alignment and comfortable or uncomfortable? Is your mind spinning? Is there mind chatter? Do you feel grounded and connected with yourself and with the earth below? And bring your left hand to your heart and place it atop the heart space. Connect to the heart space underneath. Press the heel of your hand gently into that heart space. And take your right hand and place it atop. If you're comfortable, close your eyes and take a moment here to connect with your heart space. Connect with your inner knowing. Often, when you're not sure which decision to make or which path to take, hand to heart is a way of connecting with you, with who you are, a way to ground into the earth's energy and the earth's inner knowing. Take a deep inhale in through your nose once again. And an exhale, however, feels comfortable to you. And pause and be present, hand to heart. Connect with your heart space. If you're struggling with a question of what to do, where to go, or perhaps you're wondering what it is you want to be bringing to the world, what would the world miss out on if you don't do what you feel called to do or share what you wish to share? And how can you do that wherever you might be? Whether in the exam room with patients, with friends and colleagues, or doing something different. It doesn't always involve change. It just involves seeing what it is that you are called to share. Perhaps it's a way of showing up. Perhaps it's just enjoying what you're doing. Connecting with that inner knowing and inner desires without judgment, whatever they might be. Just knowing that that is you and you are that. Take a moment to focus on your forehead or your third eye, still with hands to heart. That spot in the front of your forehead that also is your intuition or your knowing. And see if it has wisdom that your heart does not. And just notice. For some people, the third eye and the intuition, the third chakra is stronger. And for others, listening to your heart is stronger. And just notice which one for you calls louder, resonates more. And notice once again your hips or your sit bones ground into the earth, or your feet ground into the earth. Ground yourself and settle yourself as you listen to these two spots and see what you might learn. Take in another deep inhale through your nose and an exhale. Lower your hands to your thighs. Take one more final moment to just notice how you feel. Is your mind more quiet and still? Perhaps the snow globe has settled. Perhaps the path forward is clear. Perhaps not yet. And you'll need to come back to yourself and come back to your heart space and reconnect. Slowly open your eyes if they're closed and just let the light in. And once again, notice how you feel and hopefully enjoy it. Have a beautiful week ahead. We'll see you next week.